Welcome to Eye on America. I'm Michelle Miller. Today we share stories of progressing toward the future while being informed by the past. In New York City's East River, we join treasure hunters on a search for prehistoric woolly mammoth bones. And in New Orleans, we meet a music icon to see how he's using his talents to support the next generation of musicians. But first, food safety in America's kitchens. The U.S. allows a number of food chemicals and additives that are banned in Europe, raising health concerns. Ben Tracy looks at how lawmakers in California are trying to do what the FDA has not.
Christina Ochoa often worries if the food she's feeding her two young kids is safe.
A lot of salt.
Even after carefully reading ingredient labels.
Some ingredients, I have no idea what they are, how to pronounce them. I want the best for my children, and I would think that as a society, we want the best for our children.
There are more than 10,000 chemicals and additives allowed in food in the U.S., often in small amounts, but many have not been evaluated by the FDA in decades. The majority are safe, but some chemicals allowed here have been banned overseas after research has linked them to cancer and developmental or behavioral issues.
We need to put the F back into the Food and Drug Administration.
Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky introduced a bill requiring the FDA to review certain chemicals that are banned overseas and to close what's known as the grass loophole, chemicals generally recognized as safe. This allows companies to skip an extensive safety review when adding many new chemicals to food.
Is the food industry basically policing itself?
I would say yes. And when you look around the world and you see what other countries are doing to protect their consumers, we are far behind.
CBS News has obtained a copy of proposed legislation in California that would make it the first U.S. state to ban 5 common chemicals, including potassium bromate, from all food sold, distributed, or made there.
They're going to have to change their recipes, to get rid of these chemicals, and hopefully that's something that's going to have impacts far beyond our borders here in the state of California.
Christina Ochoa says the FDA needs to do more.
We're trusting them, and this is the food that is feeding our future. And I want them to be held to a higher standard.
The FDA tells us their scientists do keep up to date on food safety research, but they say it's also the responsibility of the food industry to make sure the substances they put in food are safe.
We now turn to the rise of AI. Artificial intelligence is already capable of generating ideas and writing original content. And there's a growing fear the technology could eliminate many white-collar jobs. Tony DeCopel spoke with experts about today's tech and how history can teach us about what's to come.
This is replacing white-collar jobs.
As artificial intelligence gets better.
Anyone who writes for a living has to be concerned. I mean, this thing, it can create code.
Job security is only supposed to get worse. And in reports like this one of the top jobs our AI overlords plan to kill, coding or computer programming is often on the list.
Click new prompt.
Okay, new chat.
So, with the indulgence of Sam Zonka, a coder and instructor at the General Assembly Coding School in New York, I decided to test the idea of an imminent AI takeover by seeing if the software could code for someone who knows as little about computers as me.
Oops.
Eliminating the need to hire someone like him.
Please build a personal website for CBS anchor Gayle King.
We use the famed ChatGPT, famed in part for writing code.
So all this gobbledygook on the screen, that's what people who sit in these classrooms learn.
Yep.
And I, for one, was prepared to be amazed. But take a look at the results. About as basic as a basic website can be.
What do you think? You're the professional.
And while there is more sophisticated AI coding software out there, it seems none of it can yet replace the talent of professional coders. In fact, it may actually help them.
So if you could look into the future here, how do you think AI will change the way you do your job?
It'll definitely automate the more tedious parts of it, but it's still a long ways away before having a true impact.
In fact, when we sat down ahead of the launch of the new AI-powered Bing, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella argued that artificial intelligence could help the economy across the board.
My biggest worry is we need some new technology that starts driving real productivity. It's time for some real innovation.
Do you think it'll drive up wages?
I do believe it'll drive up wages because productivity and wages are related.
But while that may be true in the long run, MIT economist David Autor believes that the rise of AI does indeed mean millions of jobs are going to change in our lifetimes. And what's scary is we're just not sure how.
We are very good at forecasting what we will not be doing and very poor at forecasting what we will be doing.
He points out, for example, that more than 60% of the types of jobs people are doing today didn't even exist in the 1940s, while many of the jobs that did exist have been replaced.
What we've seen over the last 4 decades in the U.S. and many industrialized economies is what economists call labor market polarization, which means the hollowing out of the middle set of jobs that often were kind of middle-class jobs involving blue-collar production and operative work, but also administrative support, clerical tasks. We used to have banks and banks of people who answered phones, who did typing and filing, who reproduced documents, who kept tables of books. Many of those things are now done by machines.
So when you say the job market has been polarized in the last 4 decades, you mean technology has come along, it's punched a hole in all these middle-skill jobs, and the people who used to be here some have gone up here and made more money, but a whole lot of them have gone down here and they're making way less. And that's where the pain happens.
That's especially where the pain happens.
That also troubles Meredith Whitaker, who co-founded the AI Now Institute to study how all these new systems of artificial intelligence will affect our lives.
They don't replace human labor. They just require different forms of labor to sort of, babysit them, to train them, to make sure they're working well. Whose work will be degraded and whose, house in the Hamptons will get another wing. I think that's the fundamental question when we look at these technologies and ask about questions about work.
By degrade, you mean, you still have a job, but it's not the job you used to have.
Yeah. But you better move apartments because you're not going to be able to afford the rent anymore.
But back at General Assembly at a recent open house, all that worry seemed far away as we watched a new generation of hopeful students sign up to learn how to code, come what may.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you as a coder about AI?
At this moment in time, 2.
A 2? Wow.
But the problem is that I'm not entirely sure if the AI that would replace me is 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or 5 years from now.
Coming up, how a prehistoric creature has inspired an ongoing treasure hunt in an unlikely spot. This is Eye on America. Welcome back. Deep in the waters off Manhattan, a search is underway for a trove of prehistoric woolly mammoth bones. That's right. Nancy Chin brings us along on the hunt for buried treasure.
The search for elusive hidden fortune has long captured the imagination of thrill seekers. From the fictional secret chambers full of gold and the blockbuster film National Treasure, to the real-life, cold and rather murky waters of New York City's East River.
1, 2. Diving.
These modern-day treasure hunters are looking for this. Woolly mammoth fossils, 50 tons of bones and tusks from the extinct species that last roamed the earth about 10,000 years ago. They were possibly dumped in the river right off Manhattan's Upper East Side back in the 1940s.
Is this safe?
This boat is very safe.
Okay.
On the hunt today, professional diver Don Gann and his team. Gann, better known as Dirty Water Don, is a regular on Discovery Channel's series Sewer Divers.
How many times do you think you've made this trip now?
I've made this trip 2 times a day for 3 weeks straight.
They're just one of many diving groups battling muddy water, rapid currents, and fast-moving ships, looking for any sign of the prehistoric prize. The team's as optimistic as treasure seekers throughout the ages. This underwater expedition got started not with a traditional treasure map, but something far more modern, a podcast.
I'm going to start a bone rush.
A bone rush?
Yes, sir.
The Joe Rogan Experience, with its 11 million listeners per episode. Rogan hosted Alaskan gold miner and fossil collector John Reeves. He says starting in the 1920s, tens of thousands of mammoth fossils have been unearthed in Fairbanks on what is now his property. Some of the bones and tusks were shipped to New York's American Museum of Natural History to be studied. That is, Reeves says, until the museum ran out of space.
In the 40s, they took about a whole boxcar load of these bones. They ran out of storage, and they dumped them in the East River.
Just threw it in the water?
Yes, sir.
Is it still there?
I don't know.
Could it be still there?
Could be.
Some of it, maybe?
Certainly the tusks.
Do you know where it was?
Yes, sir.
The center of Reeves' claim, an unpublished manuscript written about 30 years ago.
There were thousands and thousands of bones sent to the American Museum in the 30s and 40s. So really huge volume, and maybe they didn't have storage.
Robert Sattler, an Alaskan archaeologist, is one of the paper's co-authors. He says its lead author, Richard Osborne, who was part of the original Alaska digs, heard from colleagues about the bones being tossed into the river, much like the city used to dump its snow in the same stretch of riverfront, as seen here in this 1947 photo. But Osborne died not long after writing the report, which lay dormant for decades, until now.
Do you think these divers are on a wild goose chase?
My impression is yes, they are. But saying that, I believe there probably are some of those bones in the East River, someplace. But whether they'll be found, I doubt it.
The American Museum of Natural History itself poured cold water on this already watery pursuit, saying, "We do not have any record of the disposal of these fossils in the East River, nor have we been able to find any record of this report in the museum's archives or other scientific sources." But that denial wasn't enough to stop divers from racing across the country to hunt for the bones anyway, despite the risks.
How dangerous is it to dive out here?
It is the world's most dangerous job without this aspect. Now you're adding heavy current, heavy boat traffic, zero visibility, frigid water temperatures, and the depth. So on a scale of 1 to 10 of danger, 10 being the worst, it's a 10.
The challenges amplified by a rocky riverbed.
Once you get down there, you'll notice the bottom is on an angle like this. It's tapered, so it goes from 20 feet down to almost 70 to 80 feet in some locations. And then you can't see your hand here. And you're wearing bright blue gloves and you cannot see your hand.
If you can't even see in front of you, how are you going to find bones?
You get real close.
Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, you get real close, you gotta go. You feel it with your hands. It's time consuming, but you just keep doing it.
So far, all they found are old bottles, a pickup truck, and what seems to be the city's entire supply of bike shares. But not a single bone. Yet their deep dive for adventure and treasure continues.
You've made 60 trips out there so far.
Yep.
Do you think it's going to be worth it?
Yes and no. Because even if I don't find anything, I could be 70 years old on my front porch going, I tried.
Yeah.
I won't live in regret. I say I gave it an honest effort.
And there are worse ways to spend a day.
Oh, there's 100 worse ways to spend a day.
We continue now in Maryland, unearthing a darker aspect of America's past. A small neglected church cemetery is the final resting place for the African Americans once enslaved on a plantation there. Scott McFarland meets the volunteers and descendants, shining a light on their lives and deaths.
Behind the Sacred Heart Chapel in Bowie, Maryland, a long-forgotten cemetery. In the 1700s, the Jesuits founded a church here and a plantation that kept people enslaved, including Kevin Porter's ancestors.
This is where they lived. This is where they came to commune after laboring all day.
As the Catholic Church acknowledges this horror of its past, its archdiocese in Washington recently brought in an anthropologist to map and document possible grave sites in an overgrown area next to an existing cemetery.
So every stone that's,
firmly fixed in the ground, a fairly good size, you're going to mark with a pink flag.
As volunteers, including church members and some 7th and 8th generation descendants, swept, raked, and blew away years of debris, they saw centuries-old stones, grave markers, and indications of burials.
Oftentimes people who were enslaved, people who are people of color, could not afford to buy stones, and so they marked graves with field stones.
Is it possible dozens of people were buried here?
It's likely that hundreds of people are buried here.
With this clearing process complete, the church will spend months now grappling with how to properly mark and preserve what's really a tragic piece of the church's history.
The church says a committee of descendants, experts, and church leaders will eventually determine how to mark and honor the cemetery.
It's part of the history, and it has been talked about, but needs to be talked about more.
Other organizations and governments are seeking to do the same. One of them, the state of Maryland, has considered legislation ordering a formal review of burial places through the state to determine where money is needed to find and preserve burial grounds of historic significance to the enslaved African American experience.
This is where our ancestors are buried.
Kevin Porter hopes to see a memorial on the site one day.
It's important that we uncover them, honor them. This site is important to our family. It's important to American history, and I think we need memorials telling those stories.
He hopes there is learning and reflection in the future from this piece of history.
Ahead, we take you to the Big Easy to meet a music legend who's using his talents for good. That story's next. We close our show with the sound of New Orleans. One of NOLA's biggest musicians, Troy Andrews, better known as Trombone Shorty, has been playing in public since he was just 4 years old. I remember. His talent and advocacy are diversifying Mardi Gras crews and the street music scene. Jamie Wax spent time with the artist ahead of Mardi Gras to experience what his music is all about.
When it comes to the sounds of New Orleans, Troy Andrews knows a tune or two about it. Better known as Trombone Shorty, he picked up the tall instrument as a toddler, growing up in a music-filled home among New Orleans music royalty.
In the family, it was one of the only instruments that wasn't taken up and one of the other ones that wasn't broken at the time.
He made history at just 4 years old when he performed at Jazz Fest, then led his own brass band at the age of 6, and joined Lenny Kravitz on tour as a teen, where his career really took off.
Hardly anybody gets famous for playing the trombone. I mean, back in the swing era, there were a few trombone players who led bands.
Yeah.
But in your generation, that's almost unheard of.
Yeah, well, some people don't even know what a trombone is. Everybody knows a trumpet, a sax, drums, a piano, all of that type of stuff. But being in New Orleans, the brass is king here.
In the city where brass is king, Andrews became engulfed in the rhythm, as New Orleanians tend to do.
When we were 11, we were playing in Jackson Square, and I remember the police coming under the cabildo, and they say that we were playing too loud. And they hauled us off they took us downtown to jail, and then we did like this big protest and different things, and because of that moment, the kids and people who want to play on the street are still able to do that because of what we did.
It's one of the greatest stages in the world.
Yeah.
It just happens to be free.
Yeah.
Since then, Andrews has performed on some of the other greatest stages in the world, collaborating with artists like Stevie Wonder, Usher, and Dave Matthews Band, but never losing sight of the sounds of home.
Without New Orleans, I wouldn't be here. And I really mean that with my whole heart.
You're still chasing something. You don't feel like you've reached perfection yet.
No.
You're still reaching for something.
I'm still reaching for something. I'm always practicing. I'm always trying to get better. And it doesn't matter if we go out there and play in front of 5,000 people or wherever it may be, or 200 people. I always play as if these people don't know who I am.
Obviously, that's far from the case, especially during Mardi Gras, where everyone knows Trombone Shorty. After all, it's hard to miss his float.
I have never stood with someone in front of a giant sculpture of themselves. For people who are not from New Orleans, what does that mean to you?
It's an incredible honor. You know, we all grew up here in New Orleans and we watched the parades as children, but I never dreamt of myself being on a float or having myself on the float.
On that float, Andrews led his very own Mardi Gras parade called the Crew of Ferret, which is affectionately known by locals as Shorty Gras.
For your childhood and my childhood, most of the Mardi Gras crews were all white.
Yeah. Well, you know, just me being there, it created a diversity. And so we bring in different people from different ethnic backgrounds and we don't see anything. We just like Mardi Gras is colorful.
Mm-hmm.
We're just showing that this is what this city is about, a big gumbo.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just all do it together.
Andrew's passion for inclusion inspired him to create the Trombone Shorty Foundation to support the next generation of musicians.
I realized after Katrina that the way that I grew up in a musical neighborhood will no longer exist. As we know it, it's not going to be there for a while. And so I wanted to be able to reach kids citywide that don't have that experience that I had growing up in Tremaine, give them an opportunity to learn from some of the best New Orleans musicians. So the foundation is just about inspiring the next generation and letting them know that we can, through music, it can be your passport to do whatever you want to do.
A Grammy Award later, Trombone Shorty is a bit taller now. And he's got even bigger dreams.
I mean, we are sitting here in your recording studio. Could that kid who picked up that trombone imagine this life for himself?
I just knew that I wanted to play music, and from that, here we are, and it's a complete blessing. Like old times, huh?
Gotta love it. For more stories like these and live coverage of breaking news 24/7, stream us right here on CBS News. I'm Michelle Miller. Thank you for watching Eye on America.